Odds are when you look up the top 10 fantasy series, you'll be met with series like The Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and... All right, I'll read it. I've got an overwhelming amount of comments on my Game of Thrones videos telling me to go check out the Stormlight archive by Brandon Sanderson. Prior to this, I was aware of the author, but became extremely interested after stumbling upon his YouTube channel and listening to him speak about his books, which he recommends to start with The Way of Kings. With fantasy and sci-fi quickly becoming my new favorite genre, I'm super excited to go jump in and read the Stormlight archive.
Okay, we found a spot. First order of business. I think so. Found some big copies of Brandon Sanderson. Look at all of them. I'm not gonna lie, these are crazy. Look at that. I also ordered a book, and I think it's getting rained on. It's only a little bit wet. Hopefully the books didn't get wet. I think it's just the box. And check it out. So yeah, pretty much just the box. The box just got wet. The box set of Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive. Isn't that so sick? I'm so excited to read these. My favorite bookstore in the city is right there. I just surpassed page 100 in the book. I am exactly 1/10 of the way done with it. Not much at all. And so far, I'm really liking it. Quite a bit of world building has happened so far between the prelude describing this war that happened 4,000 years ago, as well as the prologue describing a battle between Szeth with a S, and a king that he was sent to assassinate. It basically just introduces the audience to the Stormlight abilities, the whole crazy scene of this building falling apart, and it was just awesome. The king's final words are also really cool. He's like, oh, go find my brother. The main story so far has basically been switching between these two characters, one named Kaladin and the other named Shallan, I think. Kaladin was this ex-war veteran, and he's basically been enslaved. Shallan is a part of a royal family, and her father has secretly died, and she's trying to just make sure that all of her family political landscape doesn't collapse. And she's been searching for this one higher up who will help her by allowing her to become her apprentice. And in this last chapter, she was told she can't become the apprentice, so now she's trying to do it more with brute force. I am basically just super excited to read more. On to the interludes. I'm officially done with part 1. Kaladin is now a bridge maker, and he works at Bridge 4, and what they do is they carry these bridges to cover like these chasms made by these tectonic like plates, all while there's like a war going on and arrows are being fired at them. The chapter basically ends with Kaladin now kind of finding purpose in this bridge making profession, and he feels like less of a hollow character, as well as he's met like this little wind spirit named Syl, who has basically been talking with him, and he's been like enjoying this little thing's company. On to part 2. First kinda crack in the spine. It was bound to happen. Dalinar Kholin's sword is named Oathbringer, which is actually the name of the 3rd book, I think. I find it really cool that like gems and all that stuff and all these references to like Stormlight is all really interesting and kind of cool with the world building. Another Kaladin flashback. I just finished reading another one of Kaladin's flashback stories, chapter 20, and I'm not gonna lie, most of them have been pretty sad. In this chapter, he ended up not saving his patient, and he was kind of told to
basically learned to let go. And then in a past one, he was getting beat up for basically being different and being like the surgeon's son. And that's why he wanted to be a soldier to begin with. So for whatever reason, those are really sad. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really enjoying part 2 so far. There's a lot of new characters and a lot of different stuff happening so far, as well as just adding to more of like the different like political things, where I feel like the first part didn't have much of that.
I also forgot to add, these flashback chapters are usually followed up with an actual Kaladin chapter. Page 500. And I finally finished part 2.
What just happened? Dalinar at the end of this chapter just decided to resign from the throne, I guess. What?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the second part. I feel like there's been a lot of different story developments, and I kind of basically just wanted to unpack it all. I usually take notes while I read, but for this section I have just a ton. The new political aspects to the novel are introduced during this part with characters like Dalinar Kolain and his 2 sons, Adolin and Renarin. In terms of relation, Dalinar is the brother to the king that Szeth killed in the very, very beginning of the book. At this time named Alucard was sabotaged while fighting a Chasm Fiend. This event is basically what put Dalinar's character into this questioning of his warlike and competitive nature. To dive deeper into this feeling, he's reading a text called The Way of the Kings, which is the name of this novel, which was a text that he was introduced to by his brother, the original king from the first bit. There's also a whole portion of visions that Dalinar had about Voidbringers and the state of the current world. Now, I've been reading this book for the better part of 2.5 weeks, and I'm only about halfway through. But in these next few days, I'm planning to have a little bit more time, and hopefully I can lock in and grind out the rest of this book. Fingers crossed. On to part 3, but I'm not gonna lie, Szeth is kind of having a rough time.
I just read in like a cool little Italian cafe and it had like art on the wall. It was pretty cool.
I think Jasna is starting to suspect that Shallan is gonna steal the Soulcaster from her. But we'll find out. Also, what just happened to Kaladin was just crazy. They had this whole plan where instead of holding the bridges up, they decided to hold it sideways so that they could protect themselves like it was a shield. And basically that whole mission went terribly. A lot of the people from his group like survived, but everybody else was killed. So then he was just like beaten and then left out in the high storm and almost died. That was just nuts. Now we're only going 1 year back. And that's now the end of part 3.
We are now in the home stretch. Part 4, here we come. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of stunned with the way that they ended part 3. Part 3 was an interesting part because it only really touched on 2 characters, and that was Shallan and Kaladin. So basically, Shallan has finally gotten caught in her lies, and this was all done by, she was poisoned, and the only way to save her was through the Soulcaster, so she had to tell Jasna that she had it. So Jasna basically now knows that she stole the Soulcaster. And then Kaladin, on the other hand, has been having these crazy, like, dreams, where in the last one, he was the High Storm, and he keeps getting met with, like, the celestial being that calls him the child of Almighty, and also brings up something called the Oath Pact. On top of all of this, he started training Bridge 4 on how to be warriors so that they can try and escape. So let's finish part 4. We're almost done.
Finally on to part 4. And I'm not gonna lie, the ending to this chapter was pretty sick. Like, just look at that last line.
I'm almost at page 1000.
Now I'm officially on page 1000. My poor book is so beat up now.
And I can't believe it. I'm on the final bit. That last part, wow, so good. What just happened? That's crazy. So the Soulcaster is a fake, and Jasna and Shallan both can Soulcast without a Soulcaster. And basically, Shallan is the one that murdered her father to begin with. What?
This final bit is crazy. So basically we just got explained why Zeth was murdering all these higher-ups, and the person, his supposed master, was the last person on the list.
Then each of them on their deathbed gain information that might save the world, and he just added a new name to the list, Dalinar Kalain. Kaladin has got a little bit of a happy ending. He's becoming Dalinar's bodyguard, basically, and the rest of the bridgemen don't have to carry bridges anymore, all because of his heroics in battle. I think that's a pretty good ending for Kaladin. It ends with him saying he'd finally managed to save someone. For now, that was enough. It's a good line. This ending is crazy, and now we're at the epilogue. Wow, what a cliffhanger.
From the very first page to the very last page, this book was a joy to read. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, this book took me a while to get through. Not because I didn't enjoy it or thought it dragged on, which actually, on the contrary, I thought it was actually very quick and snappy in its storytelling. I've just had a lot of other things going on and haven't had the time to sit down and read this 1,250 page novel. With this all being said, every time I put down this book, I couldn't stop thinking of when is the next time I'm gonna be able to pick up this book and read it again and find out what happens next. I typically feel like in novels of this size, when I sit down and read for 1 to 2 hours, I feel like I'm not progressing in the novel. That's where this book excels. I feel like I can jump into these chapters one by one, or I can sit down and burn through the entire thing without getting tired of it. And this is all where the structure comes into play. I'm going to be comparing this book a lot to A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, mainly because that's the last fantasy book that I read. They could not be more different though. One leans into realism and a fantastical version of England during the medieval times, and the other dives deep into a well-explored magic system and powers, as well as fantastical creatures and otherworldly landscapes. In structure is where they are the most similar, both using heavy political exploration between certain characters and the format of switching between its large ensemble of characters. Speaking of characters, there's some great ones in here. Kaladin being my favorite at the moment. I enjoyed the story structure as it slowly unraveled Kaladin's tragic story by switching between a young version of him and how he got into the situations you find him in the beginning. I don't know why, the connecting of the dots was really fun for me. The progression of Kaladin's story from his tragic side of losing his brother and rejecting the shard blade and armor to him ultimately growing into himself in Bridge 4 and in the end of the novel just being happy that he was able to save some people, which the Kaladin from earlier in the novel would have been not so happy. Shows some real character growth. I enjoyed all the main characters like Shallan and Dalinar, but I will not lie, some of the characters in the interludes I did not care too much about. They were really cool for world building, but ultimately I feel like I forgot majority of them. For a book that's 1,200 pages, I don't see how necessary some of these characters are. Other than Zeth, which is a character that obviously is going to play a larger role in the story moving forward. I have heard there's foreshadowing of events into later novels, and maybe some of these characters play a larger role in those, but who knows? Fantasy novels as a genre often feel overwhelming when starting a new book or world. This book was no different with the plethora of different characters that you get introduced to in the beginning of the novel, as well as the variation of timelines, especially with characters like Kaladin, made it slightly confusing. But after the first 200 pages, this book was pure enjoyment to read. I was completely hooked and never looked back. The world is so complex, but so much easier and accessible to read than a series like Game of Thrones. I just really enjoyed the story's twists and turns and epic battles. What I believe is quickly making Brandon Sanderson one of my favorite authors is you can just see the care that he's putting into the world building and the feeling of reading this novel. I really appreciate the use of images to supplement the story at the beginning of different chapters. It really helps me visualize these strange creatures that Sanderson has thought up, which many of these are very different to real-life animals and creatures. It was a good touch, and a lot of these pages make it feel like a little encyclopedia. I did finish this book in time for Sanderson to finally reveal that there's a 5th book coming to this series, so I guess in the next coming weeks I'll be burning through the next 3 of these. I'm pretty excited.